In the golden heart of Thebes, where the Nile whispered secrets to the reeds and lotus bloomed like stars on water, a royal silence loomed over the palace walls. Pharaoh Menkheperre had died unexpectedly, leaving behind a kingdom in mourning and a widow, Queen Asetnefer. Draped in sheer black linen, her eyes rimmed with kohl, Asetnefer stood motionless at the edge of the palace terrace, overlooking the river where priests chanted prayers for the dead. Yet her sorrow was not solely for her husband. Menkheperre had been kind, dutiful a ruler, not a lover. Their union had been forged in politics, not passion. Now, with the throne vulnerable and enemies circling like hawks above a lamb, the priests and generals demanded stability. That meant remarriage. Asetnefer, not yet 30, was to be married again, this time to Seti, the pharaoh's ambitious cousin. The council claimed it was her duty, a sacred offering for the sake of Ma'at, the divine balance. But duty could not silence the rhythm of her heart, which still beat in secret for someone else. Khamudi, the former royal guard. Khamudi had been banished months before, accused of treason for speaking against Seti's rising influence. But Asetnefer knew the truth. Khamudi had loved her, and she him. Their forbidden glances beneath the moon, their whispered words near the papyrus groves, those moments had filled her soul more than years of royal rituals ever could. And now, with Seti watching her every move, the palace had become a cage of gold. That evening, as the temple bells echoed across the city and sunset bathed the sandstone in crimson hues, Asetnefer knelt before the statue of Isis and whispered a prayer not for guidance, but for freedom. She would not be silenced. She would not be caged. Somewhere out beyond the western cliffs, she believed Khamudi still lived. And if the gods still listened, she would find a way not just to survive, but to reclaim the love that was stolen from her by crowns and curses. Her story was no longer that of a queen mourning a dead king. It was the beginning of a rebellion carved from longing, courage, and the unyielding will of a woman who refused to bow. The royal court buzzed with whispers as Seti arrived at the palace. Draped in crimson robes embroidered with gold falcons, he carried himself with the pride of a man who believed the crown was already his. Though not of royal blood, Seti had wormed his way into the council's favor, promising military strength, economic alliances, and an unshakable hand to rule Egypt through uncertain times. But beneath his polished charm lay a serpent's hunger. Queen Asetnefer sat motionless upon her throne of ivory and lapis, her face a mask of serenity. Only her clenched hands betrayed the storm within. As Seti stepped forward to address the court, his eyes met hers, cold and victorious. "Great nobles of Egypt," he began, "our land mourns, but mourning must not lead to weakness. The gods demand strength. And what greater sign of divine order than for the late Pharaoh's queen to stand beside a new king?" Gasps fluttered like wings through the chamber. The priests nodded in agreement. Seti turned toward Asetnefer, bowed, and held out his hand. "I ask not for your hand out of desire, my queen, but for Egypt, for Ma'at." She looked at his outstretched hand. It trembled not with humility, but with anticipation. She forced herself to rise. "Ma'at is balance, yes," she said calmly, "but also truth. And the truth is that Pharaoh Menkheperre has only just been laid to rest. Is it Ma'at to force the grieving to marry before the tomb even cools?" The council stirred uneasily, but Seti smiled. The gods speak through the living, not the dead. That night, alone in her chamber, Asetnefer paced like a lioness behind silk curtains. She had defied Seti, but she knew the price of such defiance. He would not forget it. He would not forgive it. And he would strike politically, or worse. Her thoughts drifted to Khamudi. Was he safe? Did he still think of her? Suddenly, a small scroll slipped beneath her door. She rushed to it, her heart pounding. Unrolling it with trembling fingers, she read only 3 words. The falcon watches. A warning. Or a threat. Asetnefer stared out into the desert night. She would need allies. She would need cunning. And above all, she would to move before Seti struck first. By sunrise, Thebes shimmered with its usual splendor, merchants shouting in the markets, priests chanting at the temples, scribes hunched over scrolls. Yet beneath the surface, something sinister stirred. Asetnefer, cloaked in a plain linen shawl and escorted by a trusted handmaiden, made her way through the outer gardens to the towering obelisk that marked the plaza of Ra. It was there that old secrets whispered loudest. She paused near the base, pretending to examine the carved hieroglyphs, while her handmaiden adjusted the folds of her shawl. Hidden beneath the queen's sleeve was a message written in code only one man could decipher. Asetnefer slipped the scroll into a gap in the stone, a place once used by her and Khamudi when passing messages in safer times. The falcon watches. Those words from the night before haunted her. Seti's spies were surely watching her every step, listening for a slip, waiting for weakness. She had to be careful, but she also had to act. If Khamudi still lived, he would return to this place, and if not, then she was alone in a court full of vipers. As she turned to leave, a soft voice brushed her ear. "Danger walks with the moon, my queen." She spun around, but the speaker had vanished into the crowd. Only the lingering scent of incense remained. That evening, the court gathered once again, this time for a ceremonial offering to Amun. Seti, draped in armor and splendor, stood beside her, his hand briefly brushing hers, in a gesture meant to appear innocent, but it was anything but. "You looked radiant near Ra's obelisk," he whispered through a smile. "But remember, light casts shadows, and I have eyes in all of them." Asetnefer didn't flinch. "Then I hope you'll see what your heart never will, truth." He laughed, loud enough for the nobles to hear. "Truth is what survives, my queen, and I always survive." That night, she returned to the obelisk. The scroll was gone. In its place, a single lotus flower lay on the stone. Not a message, a promise. The lotus had once been their secret sign. It meant Khamudi had seen her. He was near. Hope bloomed in her chest like the flower at her feet. In the desolate stretches beyond Thebes, where golden dunes met the blood-orange horizon, Khamudi moved like a ghost. Disgraced and exiled, he had survived on desert routes and stolen river water, waiting for the day his queen would call for him. That day had come. The lotus beneath the obelisk wasn't just a flower, it was a whisper from the past, a spark from a bond the gods themselves had not dared sever. Hidden in the ruins of an abandoned tomb, Khamudi met with Batu, a former palace scribe turned outcast. Batu scoffed at the hole in Khamudi's hand. "She's risking her life for a man the court already buried in shame." But Khamudi's voice was firm. "She hasn't buried me. Not yet." Back in the palace, Asetnefer sat beneath a columned hall, masking fear with grace. Rumors swirled like desert winds. Seti's plans were shifting from politics to poison. A second refusal might not just cost her the crown, but her life. She turned to the temple of Hathor for refuge, asking the high priestess for protection. But her true aim lay beneath the floor, the ancient tunnels carved for queens of war and escape. At midnight, she slipped into the temple's underbelly, barefoot and cloaked, a dagger tied at her hip. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. This was no longer a queen's journey, it was a woman's defiance. As she reached the chamber, where 2 torches flickered weakly against sandstone walls, a breath of wind stirred. A whisper of movement. She froze, dagger raised. Then came a voice low, steady, familiar. "Asetnefer." From the shadows emerged Khamudi. Dust clung to his skin. A scar lined his cheek. But his eyes held the same fire they did the night he'd first pledged himself to her. Her grip on the dagger loosened. "You came," she whispered, stepping forward, eyes glistening. He bowed low. "For you, always." She touched his face, as if to confirm he wasn't a dream sculpted by longing. No royal decree, no desert exile, no vengeful cousin could sever what bound them. Together, they were no longer broken remnants of a past. They were a force rising from sand and silence. And the storm was only beginning. The following dawn rose heavy with tension. Thebes stirred, but the palace was unusually quiet, as if it too sensed that something sacred had shifted. Queen Asetnefer returned to her chambers. Whispers floated through the marble halls. The queen was missing. Some claimed she had fled. Others murmured of Seti's wrath finally catching her. But in truth, Asetnefer was very much alive, just not in the world where she was expected to kneel. She had shed her royal linens for a simple white tunic, the kind worn by market women. With Khamudi by her side, she traveled through the temple tunnels, away from the city's golden heart, and toward the forgotten edges of the desert. Every step was an unraveling of status, of safety, of history. Yet she felt lighter, stronger. For the first time since Menkheperre's death, she breathed without weight on her chest. Khamudi remained silent for much of their journey, but his presence was an anchor. They stopped at a dried riverbed under a cluster of thorn trees. As Asetnefer drank from a goatskin pouch, he finally spoke. "You know what they'll say, that you abandoned your throne for a traitor." She met his gaze. "Let them speak. Let them shout it from the temples. I'd rather be cursed in freedom than worshipped in chains." Khamudi smiled, not out of pride, but reverence. This was not the girl he had loved in secret behind palace walls. This was a queen remade by fire. Yet their path was not without danger. Seti had already mobilized the royal guard. Patrols now scoured the outskirts of Thebes. One wrong step, one familiar face, and they would be dragged back in chains or worse. That night, as they camped among sandstone hills beneath a sky dripping with stars, Asetnefer stared into the flames. "I have no crown, no army, no allies in the court. Just you and a fire in my chest." Khamudi reached for her hand. "Sometimes, that's all revolutions are made of." And as the wind howled through the desert like an ancient drum, they knew the days of hiding were over. If Seti wanted a crown built on betrayal, then let him have it. Asetnefer was building something stronger: truth, loyalty, and vengeance. In the halls of the palace, fury brewed like a storm over the Red Land. Seti stood before the council of elders, his face carved from stone, but his eyes burning with contempt. "She fled," he spat. "The queen has abandoned Maat, abandoned Egypt. This is not grief, this is treason." Some of the elders exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared oppose him. Seti's grip on the military had grown tighter, his whispers with the priests more frequent. To many, he was already Pharaoh in all but name. "I will bring her back," he declared, slamming his staff against the marble floor. "Alive if she repents, dead if she resists." Meanwhile, Asetnefer and Khamudi pressed deeper into the desert, making their way toward the Valley of the Nobles, a place forgotten by time, where old allies of the late pharaoh still lingered. It was here they hoped to gather the remnants of Menkheperre's loyalists, scholars, warriors, and priests who had quietly stepped away when Seti's shadow darkened the palace. Their journey was perilous. On the third day, a merchant caravan spotted them near the ruins of Waset and whispered their description to a passing guard. Before dusk, soldiers were dispatched. The hunt had begun. That night, as the stars blinked above the dunes, Asetnefer dreamed of a cobra coiled at her feet, hissing, ready to strike. When she awoke, her arms were trembling. Khamudi leaned close. "Another dream?" She nodded. This time it wore Seti's eyes. "Then the gods are warning us," he said. "He won't stop until he sees you buried." "Then we must strike first," she replied, voice steady. The next morning, they arrived at the hidden chamber of Anen, Menkheperre's former high priest. The old man greeted them with disbelief and trembling hands. "You should not have come. The walls have ears." Asetnefer stepped forward. "Then let the walls listen. I am not here to beg. I am here to fight. Will you help me?" Anen stared at her, seeing not a fugitive, but the daughter of Egypt rising from the dust. After a long silence, he bowed low. "Then let Egypt rise with you, my queen." In that moment, Asetnefer understood Seti had bitten first. But now, the cobra would taste its own venom. Within the sacred hollows of Anen's temple, torches flickered against stone walls etched with forgotten names, warriors, scribes, and priests who had once stood for truth in a time of tyranny. Now, those same chambers breathed again, with purpose. Word of Asetnefer's return began to ripple like wind through reeds. One by one, those loyal to Menkheperre now scattered farmers, old guards, and hidden scribes emerged from shadow. They called her not by her royal title, but by a name born of hope: Khemet, the flame that returns. Asetnefer stood before them with fire in her voice and steel in her spine. "I did not come to reclaim a throne," she declared, "but to restore balance. Egypt belongs to its people, not to a serpent crowned by fear." The men and women who had lost everything under Seti's rise stood straighter, eyes lit with something ancient belief. Under Anen's guidance, they began to train again. Scribes forged messages in coded ink. Former soldiers, now weary farmers, sparred with wooden staffs by moonlight. Even the temple's children began carrying water, watching in awe as a queen built an army from ashes. But time was not their ally. In the palace, Seti had crowned himself. With the priest's reluctant blessing and the military's full backing, he declared himself Pharaoh Seti I, ruler of both Upper and Lower Egypt. To mark his reign, he ordered statues of Menkheperre torn down, and Asetnefer declared an enemy of the gods. "She is no queen," he roared to the crowd. "She is a curse, a blight upon the land." The people clapped, but many did so out of fear, not faith. Deep down, even they sensed the old gods stirring, displeased. Back in the valley, Khamudi stood beside Asetnefer atop a rocky cliff. Below them, the beginnings of an army trained in silence. "This will not be won with swords alone," he said. She nodded. "Then we will wield truth sharper than blades." She turned to the gathered followers. "We march not for power, but for justice. We rise not to conquer, but to cleanse." As dusk descended and the stars lit the sky like 1,000 watching eyes, Asetnefer lifted a torch high into the air. "Let this flame remind the world. I was never lost. I was only waiting." As the moon reached its fullest, casting silver light upon the Valley of the Nobles, Asetnefer's growing force began its silent journey toward Thebes. They did not march with fanfare or banners, but with purpose etched into every step. The desert wind carried their footsteps like an ancient hymn, one only the gods could hear. Their goal was not to storm the palace walls, but to strike at the heart of Seti's power, the grand temple of Amun. It was there he had crowned himself. There he declared her an enemy of the gods, and it would be there he would fall. At dawn, cloaked in linen dyed the red of the rising sun, Asetnefer led her warriors through the temple district's outer paths. Khamudi scouted ahead, signaling each safe passage with a flick of his blade. They moved like shadows beneath carved columns, past silent altars where priests once prayed for peace but now bowed to fear. Just as they reached the outer gates, the silence shattered. A young guard spotted them and raised the alarm. Bells clanged, horns blew. The temple square erupted in chaos. Seti soldiers poured out in waves, their polished bronze glinting like fire. But they had not expected resistance this organized, this fierce. Asetnefer's followers, farmers, scribes, forgotten warriors fought with the fury of truth long suppressed. Spears clashed against shields, arrows darkened the sky, blood stained the white steps of the temple. In the center of the chaos, Asetnefer moved like prophecy incarnate. Her blade sang through the air, her voice rising above the clamor. For justice, for the Nile, for the soul of Egypt. Khamudi fought beside her, back to back, his movements sharp and purposeful. They were not just fighting an army, they were fighting a lie that had ruled too long. On the high altar steps, Seti emerged in full regalia, a golden serpent crown upon his brow. He sneered as he surveyed the battle. "So, the queen returns as a butcher," he shouted. "Shall we see if your blood runs as noble as your words?" Asetnefer pointed her blade toward him. "You sit on a stolen throne, Seti, and tonight the gods take it back." The temple bells tolled again, not for worship, but for reckoning. The battle for Egypt had begun. Smoke curled into the morning sky as the temple of Amun shook with the weight of war. The clash of steel rang through sacred halls, echoing off pillars once meant for prayer. Amid the chaos, Asetnefer climbed the temple steps, each footfall a declaration. Behind her, Khamudi and a handful of loyal fighters carved a path through Seti's elite guard. Blood soaked the alabaster tiles, mixing with broken amulets and fallen feathers. Seti stood waiting atop the altar, blade in hand, the golden serpent crown catching the first light of dawn. His eyes burned, not with fear, but with rage. "You would destroy Egypt to soothe your pride," he hissed. Asetnefer raised her sword. "No, Seti. I would destroy you to restore her soul." They circled one another, royalty stripped down to raw survival. No guards, no blessings, just two wills colliding at the edge of history. Seti struck first, sharp, fast, calculated. But Asetnefer met each blow with the precision of a woman who had bled for every inch of her freedom. She was no longer the widow in mourning. She was a storm in flesh. "You were always too soft," Seti sneered, swinging wide. "Too kind to rule." She dodged and countered, her blade slicing across his arm. "And you were always too cruel to be followed." Their swords clashed again, metal sparking, sweat flying. Around them, the battle raged. Loyalists fought to protect the queen, while Seti's forces began to falter, shaken by the sight of their false pharaoh losing ground. Then came the final strike. Seti lunged in fury, but Asetnefer stepped aside, twisting her blade clean through the serpent crown and deep into his side. He gasped, stumbling back, hands clutching the wound. The crown fell from his head, rolling down the steps like a discarded curse. Silence fell. The fighting slowed, and then all eyes turned to her. She stood tall, sword bloodied, face fierce, breath steady. Seti collapsed behind her, groaning his last. Khamudi reached her side, his expression torn between triumph and disbelief. "It's over," he whispered. Asetnefer looked out at the gathered warriors, citizens, and priests who had once called her cursed. "No," she said. "It's just begun." And with that, she stepped down from the altar not as a queen reborn, but as a ruler remade. The sun rose slow and golden over Thebes, casting light upon a city reborn. Smoke still lingered in the temple air, but the sounds of battle had faded into quiet chants of mourning and renewal. Seti's body had been taken away not with honor, but with the hush reserved for traitors. His serpent crown, now cracked, was buried beneath the earth, a symbol of power gained through lies and lost to justice. At the banks of the Nile, Queen Asetnefer stood barefoot in the sand, her blood-stained tunic replaced by white linen, her kohl-lined eyes turned toward the water. The river flowed, as it always had, calm, ancient, unbroken, yet it seemed to shimmer with approval, as if the gods themselves had blessed her victory. Behind her, a gathering formed. Priests, scribes, farmers, soldiers. Not one had come by command. They came by will, by belief. Anen, the old high priest, approached her with a crown simple, rimmed with lotus petals instead of gold serpents. "It needs its queen," he said softly. She looked at the crown, then at the people. "Egypt needs truth," she replied, and took the crown with steady hands. Khamudi joined her, standing not as a guard, but as an equal. Their bond no longer needed hiding. The court had seen them fight side by side, bleed for the land, choose honor over comfort. They were no longer scandal. They were story told in every home from the Delta to the southern mines. That evening, as torches lit the streets and chants echoed from the temples, Asetnefer was crowned once more, this time not in silence, but in thunderous acclaim. Children sang her name. Elders wept. And from the steps of the same temple where her blood had nearly been spilled, she declared, "Let this be Egypt's new age, not ruled by fear, but by wisdom, not by conquest, but by justice." The crowd roared, but it was the quiet afterward that held power, a stillness filled with promise. The Nile, in its eternal flow, had watched kings rise and queens fall, but it would remember her Asetnefer, the widow who became a warrior, the queen who became the people's flame. And long after she returned to the gods, her story would ride the river's song, reminding Egypt, "Justice may sleep, but it never dies."